All right. Thank you, Hazel. Well, welcome to the Environmental Review Implementation Subcommittee, or ERIS, meeting. I'm Nancy Daubenberger, MnDOT Commissioner, and I am honored to be serving as chair for today in place of Commissioner Stroman, who's unable to attend. So we will have some first meeting announcements. I don't know that there's any announcements for today, but I think we can move on to roll call. And Executive Director Nuschler, would you go ahead and call the roll?
Yes, Chair, I can do that. All right. I don't believe Commissioner Arnold could join us today. We have Ray Kirsch or Maria Lavadier from Commerce. Yes, I see Maria. Thank you, Maria. Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
I'm present, thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Daubenberger.
Here.
All right. Board Member Hintz. Chair Holman.
I'm here.
All right. Commissioner Kessler.
I'm here as well.
Board Member Nelson.
Present.
And Commissioner Stroman can't be here, but I believe we have Melissa Kuski from the DNR.
Present.
So that is our ERIS meeting, our ERIS members. We do have 5 ERIS members, which is a quorum. Is there any other EQB board members, not ERIS members, that want to announce themselves? I see Board Member Katzenberger.
Here.
Anyone else? The other commissioners or board members on the line?
This is Meyer Kunis, representing MDH.
Thank you. We do have the quorum of ERIS.
Great, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. So then next on the agenda, we have the approval of the consent agenda. And that is meeting minutes from the September 18th, 2024 ERIS meeting. On packet page 5, you'll find those. And then the preliminary agenda for today's meeting, March 19th of 2025 ERIS meeting. And that is on packet page E. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
This is Commissioner Kessler. I will make that motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Kessler made a motion. Is there a second?
This is Joseph Bauer-Kemper. I'll make that second.
Thank you, Board Member Bauer-Kemper. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, why don't we go ahead and call roll on the consent agenda?
Commissioner Arnold. Still not with us. Board Member Bauer-Kemper.
Yes.
Commissioner Daubenberger.
Yes.
Board Member Hintz.
Yes.
Chair Holman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kessler.
Here.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Board Member Nelson.
Answer.
Okay.
Yes.
And Commissioner Stroman is not present. That is 6. 6 ayes, Madam Chair.
All right.
Ayes, so the
Thank you.
agenda is adopted.
Awesome. Thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. Well, with that, then we can move on to the Executive Director's report. Go ahead, Director.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here for our ERIS meeting today. Excited about it. Excited about some of the initiatives you'll get to hear a little bit about and our always popular data report. So thanks for being here. And for those of you who are not members of ERIS, but listening in, as usual, our meeting is being recorded. And we do have a meeting chat that is open and visible to everyone, but the chat is not kept as part of the meeting record. So if you could please keep that for logistical issues. Members of the ERIS committee, we do welcome your questions and feedback, and we'll work in time for board members as well. If you're online, use that raise hand function or jump in. it is helpful to have your camera on while speaking. Members of the public, we plan for 2 opportunities for public comment today. One specifically on item 7, the greenhouse gas calculator update, and then general comments at the end of the meeting. If you're here in person, you can sign up, use the sign up sheets. If you're online, when we get to the public comment part of the agenda, use that raise hand feature, which on the next slide will give you a little visual for. It's up there at the top. To indicate you'd like to make a public comment, you can also use the chat to state that you would like to make a comment. And then we'll notify you when you can unmute and speak. So those are the logistics. For the executive director's report and announcements, starting with just a brief legislative update, starting with gas production. Bills have been introduced to implement a temporary framework for gas production in Minnesota, and that's Senate File 2530 and House File 2447. So if you recall, we discussed the recommendations that were made by state agency staff to the legislature for that temporary framework. Those were just recommendations, and the current versions of the bill do not include any of the EQB's staff's recommendations related to environmental review. So other recommendations made by other agencies were included, ours were not. The bill is going to, its first hearing is tomorrow in the Senate Environment Committee. Jesse and I will be attending. And I suspect that the question of environmental review is likely to come up for discussion in that hearing, and we'll see if there are changes to that bill. The bill did keep in EQB's rulemaking direction to do rulemaking for a permanent framework around environmental review for those rules, or for gas production. And we do have plans for you all to hear more about how we think that will go, and the staff's plan for getting that work done next month. Also tomorrow afternoon, there's a hearing on House File 1012, a bill that would direct EQB to make rules related to environmental review for off-highway vehicle trails. And so I will also be testifying about that bill tomorrow. The current draft has a very short timeline for making those rules, which I'm concerned about, given the 2 other rules on our plate. So we've been talking to the author of the bill about that, see if we can get a little more time to make sure we can make those rules if that legislation passes. Otherwise, in legislative session, there's been a lot of interest in environmental review and other regulations for data centers. That's come up frequently, and various other issues. And now budget bills are moving forward. So we'll continue to see what happens with that session. And some other work that's going on, EQB staff, as myself and Sarah and Steph, are participating in an interagency task force to ensure that the state is ready to implement environmental review and permitting regulations to support production of sustainable aviation fuel in Minnesota. So sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, is a low carbon jet fuel that can be made from biomass, waste, energy, hydrogen, and it's a key near-term method to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from air transportation. So the state is gearing up to make sure that we know how that production fits into all of our regulations, including environmental review. So we're ready when folks want to produce it here, because we think there is quite a bit of interest. That's some of the other work that we are doing. In terms of following up a little bit on comments made at prior board meetings, the MPCA has been following up with last month's board meeting comments on greenhouse gas emissions and nitrate and water quality. I'm also working with MPCA staff to find a good time for the board to get an update on the state's planned revisions to the climate action framework. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that sometime in the summer or fall so that you all can hear more about the climate action framework work. And we may also have a chance, I need to follow up on this as well, to hear about some updates that are being made by an interagency group to the state's overall nutrient reduction strategy for nutrients and water quality. So we may hear more about that too. So those things related to those comments are on my mind, and then PCA has been following up, as I noted. And that, Madam Chair, is the director's report today.
Right, thank you very much. So are there any questions for Executive Director Nuschler on the Executive Director report? by board members. Hearing anything, so we will go ahead and move on in the agenda. The next item is the election of the chair for ERIS. And Commissioner Stroman, as I mentioned, was not able to be here today, but she's been holding this position and has indicated her interest in and willingness in continuing to serve in that position. Would anyone like to nominate Commissioner Stroman for the position? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Kessler, and I'm thrilled that Commissioner Stroman wants to do that again. So I would happily nominate her.
We have a nomination from Commissioner Kessler. Thank you so much. We have a second on that.
Second, Public Member Nelson.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Right. Are there any other nominations or interest in serving in the chair role for ERIS? A moment to think about that. Not hearing anything or seeing any hands. With that, why don't we go ahead and vote to approve of Commissioner Stroman as continuing as the chair of ERIS. So with that, we just move on to a roll call vote? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Why don't we go ahead and then take the roll call vote on the nomination for Commissioner Stroman as chair of ERIS. So go ahead, Director Nuschler.
All right, Commissioner Arnold, not present. Board Member Bauerkemper,
Yes.
Commissioner Daubenberger,
Yes.
Board Member Hintz,
Yes.
Chair Holman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kessler,
Aye.
Board Member Nelson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Stroman is not present. That's 6 ayes and 2 not present.
Motion passes. Great. I extend my appreciation to Commissioner Stroman. I will definitely do that after the meeting for being willing to continue to serve as chair and her interest in that. All right, so that brings us to the next item on the agenda, and that is our Executive Director Nuschler will present the Environmental Review Program Fiscal Year 25 work updates. So go ahead, Executive Director Nuschler.
Thank you, Chair Daubenberger. Thank you for chairing today. As we were putting together the agenda and we're starting to think about, it's March, what are we doing next year? I thought it would be helpful to give a very brief update on the work that the Environmental Review Program has been doing in the past, over this fiscal year. Talk a little bit about where it fits with our strategic plan and how we're looking into ways to identify and to evaluate whether we're successfully doing the things that we said we were going to do. So this will be pretty brief because you will get some of it more in depth as we go through the meeting. So just a reminder of our outcome and strategies from our strategic plan about maintaining and improving the Environmental Review Program, and our focus in providing guidance and training to support completing EAWs, developing tools and guidance around climate pollution and resiliency, improving data collection, and evaluating and developing updates to our rules. So some of our work fits in these big buckets, and I'm going to talk about them individually. So focusing on guidance and training as our first strategy. Guidance and training really supports our program effectiveness by ensuring user friendliness and consistency in the completion of environmental review by multiple RGUs. And we're looking in and adding ways that we will know if we're successful in providing guidance and supportive training to the folks who need it. So we have launched some surveys, which Jesse and Sarah will be talking a little bit more about in the data collection portion. And are asking questions and plan to ask questions like, did you come to us for help, and were you able to find the information that you needed on our website to complete your review? So for people who've done an EAW, to say, did you use our website? Did it help you? and looking at those trends over time. So that's a customer service survey that we started implementing at the end of last calendar year. And as we work to think about trainings that we can do, we're also planning to develop training evaluations so we can ask people whether that training is serving their needs. That's some of what so that's sort of how we're thinking about how the guidance and training strategy supports our effectiveness. So far this year, we have done a refresh of the existing environmental review guidance, particularly focused on EAWs. The EIS piece is in progress, and the website's been updated so that the information is easier to find and more clearly laid out. We have a lot of things in progress, and that's working on the petition guidance to support petitioners who want to ask for environmental review and for RGUs that are reviewing petitions. We're looking into our guidance around alternative urban area-wide review and seeing what we need to do to update those. Making a plan for tribal guidance, and that's guidance on how to incorporate tribal perspectives into environmental review. We're reaching out to organizations that we know have conferences and related opportunities that we might be able to give some training and some updates at, and also developing a plan to host some trainings ourselves, and particularly climate, which you'll hear more about. And we're also working and ongoingly tracking the technical assistance calls that we get and the assistance that we provide so that we can understand where are we getting a lot of calls or a lot of requests, where things may be more unclear, so that will inform our future guidance. In this area, we're still kind of tracking what MPCA is doing with cumulative impacts, which relates to our decision criteria. And so it's very important, but sort of future work as we're currently tracking the PCA work and then seeing where that leads and how we can help maybe have environmental review support that work moving forward. The second part is the climate tools and climate tools and guidance strategy. Again, supporting program effectiveness through scientific integrity, measurability, consistency, and accountability. Some of the things that we want to measure to know if we're doing well here is looking at whether the EAWs answer the climate questions, whether we launch the climate calculator tool on time, whether the RGUs that are completing EAWs actually use the climate calculator, and whether they're satisfied with how it works for them. So probably be looking into how we can get that information as we start to roll out the calculator. So you might need some survey tools there. And again, also training evaluations as we roll out the calculator. So really, this is a lot of what Steph is going to be talking about here shortly. So we have the climate resiliency guidance. We've made some, I think we're going to be able to include more of this in the calculator than we originally thought. Calculator's on track. We're also going to be looking at the guidance and the user manual on how to use the calculator, and then the general climate guidance. So Steph will cover all of this, but everything is really well on track for that. And then I think Sarah and Jesse will cover some of the data about who's been answering the climate questions on EAWs as well. Then we have strategy 3, our data collection strategy. Really making sure that we have a good ability to monitor and evaluate the program. Because collecting more data and better data that will help us understand how we're succeeding in other areas of work. So we want to have some data on whether people are using our guidance, some data on our technical assistance, how much are we doing, what kinds of inquiries are we getting, improved data on the length of time of environmental review. And again, we're looking at tracking our technical assistance, some surveys from people who are doing environmental review and things like that. And we have really completed most of our data collection projects for our work plan, but the slides do not want to advance to let me show you that slide. Becca, would you mind advancing the slide for me, please? And so this is really what you're going to see about. We've revised the data management plan. We have a new website. We've launched some surveys. We've done some internal data cleanup to really help us understand our historical data. We'll be continuing to track technical assistance and evaluate all the data from surveys. So really, we look at the work plan, and we've done a lot in data in particular this year. And last, just looking at the rule evaluation and updates. and the work that was in this area, again, to support that, looking at what we can do to support consistency, to support scientific integrity. We have completed the mandatory categories report. In progress is the energy infrastructure permitting rulemaking that you heard about last month. The projects list to support continuous improvement, so we can really lay out what we need to evaluate. We're still working on that, and probably something that you'll see as we begin to plan for next year's work. Next month, you'll hear more about the gas and oil production mandatory category rulemaking. We're also taking a look through all the rules for what we would call a potential housekeeping rule, which is just to clean up all the things, places where the rules might not match the statutes and things have gotten out of date. So we're looking at doing some cleanup there too. And then we'll have the next round of continuous improvement moving forward. So that's what we've gotten done in that area. And I thought it would be helpful just to kind of go through and report out a little bit on the work plan. And it was very short. And that's what I've got, because you're going to hear much more about at least 2 of the projects. So are there any questions for me on any of that?
Any questions, board members? Or any thoughts that you might have on the updates you just heard? I have a question. Go ahead, Commissioner Kessler.
So can you remind me if there are proposed legislation around environmental review related to data centers?
Yes, so there is, so Commissioner Kessler has proposed, proposed legislation around data centers and environmental review. There is a bill, House File 28 is the House number. I don't remember the Senate number. And that speaks to alternative urban area-wide reviews. So we have the AUAR process that's really meant to be used. It can only be used by rule by local governments and meant to be used really for kind of classic local government planning scenarios. And we are seeing, and Sarah, Jesse could probably say more about this when we get to the data. We are seeing an increase in AUARs, and we are seeing significant numbers of, well, I don't know, significant numbers, but data centers, the buildings themselves being reviewed through that AUAR process. What the legislation that we've been involved in is trying to do is to clarify that the things that are allowed by rule to go through an AUAR can be evaluated that way and can move forward, even in the case where a project like a data center within an AUAR might need some additional something that needs separate environmental review. So for example, backup generators to generate power. Other potentials might be a water appropriation permit. And those kinds of things that trigger different environmental review, that trigger EAWs, can't be done in an AUAR. So the legislation aims to be clear about those things being separate pieces, but both applying as needed.
Okay, so can I ask a follow-up question?
It's complicated.
So-
So I didn't bring my notes.
No, I know, I apologize, because I didn't tell Director Nussler that I was going to ask this question, but I keep getting questions about data centers and environmental review and permitting, so I appreciate you trying to be helpful. So if a proposed data center in a location goes through an AUAR at the local level, that is allowed, and if that facility also would need a environmental review and or permitting related to backup generators and water withdrawal, it would also have to go through those steps.
Yes, that's correct. Because AUARs are limited to commercial, residential, warehousing, and light industrial. And sort of the building of the data centers with all the computers. Many people are basically classifying that as light industrial. And then the other pieces are separate and would still need to go through environmental review if they trigger those, if it's a trigger like more of an industrial category. It's a little bit of so it's sort of putting the clarity in the House File 28 is to sort of put a clear boundary between those 2 pieces.
Thank you for that question, Director Nussler. I see another question from Board Member Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, if you could refresh my memory of the MPCA's effort regarding cumulative impact assessment and whether that sort of is intentionally designed to inform the environmental review process, or is that some other permitting process?
I think I think it's really focused more on the permitting process. Commissioner Kessler is nodding at me. But, you know, as we think of environmental review, right, and our goal is for a lot of information to come out earlier in the process, one of the things that we want to look at is how, like, can we adapt so that environmental review can provide information that will further feed into that. And I think there are some pilot programs going on, and PCA's environmental review team may be looking at how to pilot cumulative impacts in environmental review. Colleen is working with them on that and helping with that and understanding how that goes, so we can continue to see how we might be able to provide, I don't even know what the possibilities are, guidance, form changes, rule updates, long-term that might support that.
Right.
Yeah, and Commissioner Kessler would love to have.
Yeah, Board Member Nelson, I think it's a good question, because if you're familiar with the existing environmental review forms, it does have a section in there called cumulative impacts, which is confusing. If you are looking at what the MPCA has been authorized and directed to do by the legislature, which is a rulemaking process to incorporate what the rule calls cumulative impacts into specific types of air permit in specific areas of the state. So the MPCA is going through a inclusive and very community-driven rulemaking process right now, and I can provide links to those meetings and the former meeting videos if people want to get involved in the cumulative impacts air permitting rule. And as Director Neuscher said, prior to the legislature directing us to do that, we were already interested in understanding how we could be more inclusive in our cumulative consideration of data, both in environmental review and permitting. So the pilot study work is a continuation of that.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. And I think the hand went up again for Board Member Nelson. Go ahead.
I just want to thank you for that explanation. I just asked because, you know, that has been something in environmental review that has come up on and off. And I recall during the continuous improvement project that was frequently a comment as well. So at some point, yeah, I think we need to probably build on what you're doing and have that conversation.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Great. Any other questions or thoughts on the updates you heard? Environmental review work plan. Board Member Nelson, is that a new hand? I'm not keeping track. No, okay. I am not seeing any other hands, hearing anything. So I think we can move on. And so then the next item on the agenda, we have Jesse Krasinski, our Environmental Review Program Administrator at the EQB. And then also Sarah Laurel, is she?
It's
Hi.
virtual, yeah.
All right, very good. Who's our Environmental Review Technical Assistance and Energy Transition Communities Support person at EQB. And they'll present the 2024 performance report. And that's on page 9 of your packet. So welcome, Jesse and Sarah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jesse Krasinski. Thank you for the introduction with the Environmental Review staff at EQB. And co-presenting virtually with me today is
Sarah Laurel. I do environmental assistance or ER environmental technical assistance and energy transition community support.
So today we're going to talk about the Environmental Review Performance Report, which Chair mentioned was in the packet. So today we're really just kind of hit some highlights from the report and really show some more comparisons over the last couple of years from some of those key data points. Before I really get into the presentation, I have this really dizzying slide. to promote the new data website that staff has launched. It serves a number of purposes. One of those is just sort of consolidating the things that we already have, including the Environmental Review database and the active projects map. And then it introduces some new things like what's scrolling by you right now, which is the public dashboard, which really pulls out a lot of the information from these performance reports and makes it more visual and helpful for the public to view or anybody to view. And there's some interactive pieces in there where you can filter by year or project type or environmental review process. And then additionally, we added sort of the library of past performance reports, as well as the most recent data management plan on the data website. So if you're interested in supplementing the information today, you can go to our website and look at that dashboard or the past performance reports and pull those if you're interested. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, before I get into the data, why we collect the data. Really, EQB's responsibility is to, within environmental review, is to monitor the effectiveness of the program and making sure that the implementation of the program is really meeting its objectives. And EQB does have the authority to modify the rules as necessary. And then another big piece that we play is the assistance, technical assistance piece and understanding and implementing the rules for RGUs. And given that the EQB does not implement the program, it really highlights the need and the importance of collecting information of how the program is really being implemented so that we can continue to track it and evaluate how the program is really being implemented. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll jump into the actual data. Here we have a whole bunch of graphs and things, a little bit of alarming number of things to look at. But last 10 years, we're looking at the frequency of environmental review processes. So we have EAWs in blue, looks a little funky on that screen. EISs in red, AUARs in green, and then complete petitions in the purple. So if you kind of look back at the past trends here, in 2024, specifically, the lowest number of EAWs we've had in the last 10 years. And if you look at, chunk it into the probably last 5 years, you can certainly see a decrease in the overall number of EAWs. EISs over the last 10 years really haven't changed much, 210 a year. AUARs slightly trending up over the last 5 years. Over the last 10 years, pretty consistent, but the last 5 years specifically, it looks like it's been trending up slightly. And petitions as well, the last 5 years have really been steady and pretty high compared to the 5 years prior. Next slide, please. So this is just showing the common project types, and I should say the common EAW project types. The majority of these slides in this presentation really are heavily focused on EAWs, given that they really do dominate the amount of environmental review that we see. So here, the types of projects that we see in EAWs in 2024, some common project types that we see every year. In industrial, commercial, institutional type projects, non-metallic mineral mining is usually in their top projects by year. Stream diversion's a little bit different. Usually we see some type of water, typically wetlands and public waters mandatory category is triggered, but usually some type of water project is in our top. One that we don't see that I think is interesting is residential developments. Typically, if you look back past years, residential developments usually sits in one of these common project types for EAWs that are completed in a given year. Could likely be due to the number of AUARs increasing. We're just seeing less, or it's just data that we don't have that's influencing. We just don't. Just seeing less local units of government doing development projects. And 6 discretionary EAWs, 3 state and 3 local. So that's pretty consistent last couple of years. About 5 per year is our average for discretionary EAWs. Next slide, please. So here we have a slide kind of just discussing who's doing environmental review. In 2024, 28% of EAWs were done by state RGUs and 72% at the local level. If you compare those numbers over the last couple of years, definitely an increase percentage-wise for state projects versus local. If you just look at the total number of projects, state number is pretty steady and consistent, 12 to 14, 13 last 3 years. It's just the local level of EAWs have fallen pretty significantly over the last 3 years. Next slide, please. So here we're just looking at sort of who's participating in environmental review, specifically EAWs again. The chart on your left is a little bit confusing. It's displaying average number of comment letters per EAW. Now, over the last couple of years, we've had one project per year that really receives a ton of comments. That really, when you look at the raw average with that probably more controversial type project, it really just skews the numbers significantly and raises the average. And that would be the blue graph there. And you can see it's kind of all over the place. And then if you look at the green, it's just taking out that one project per year. And it really brings that average more down to about 10 comment letters per EAW. So still interesting to see that some certain projects really get a lot of comments. But if you can include that information, it really skews the data. So I just wanted to take that out to show a more actual average. And a new metric that we looked at this year, 28% of all EAWs that were completed in 2024, the RGU actually held a public meeting, which is pretty interesting given that that's not a requirement by rule. I think that's something that we'd like to continue to keep an eye on to see if that's something that is consistently happening or if 2024 is maybe an anomaly there. Next slide, please. So now we're moving on to, what did environmental review or what did the EAW process accomplish? And so we've really been tracking what we call usable information. That's kind of a term in the rules. And in 2024, we get this information from RGUs as they publish their EIS needs decision. So we ask them questions about if the EAW process identified potential environmental effects, and we had 94% indicate that it did. And then 89% of RGUs indicated that the EAW process also identified mitigation measures within the EAW for potential environmental effects. And then this one's got a nice linear trend over the last 3 years showing an increase. So that's nice to see that the EAW process is really providing great usable information for both RGUs and the public. Next slide, please. This slide is showing the time spent in environmental review. Now, it's not telling the whole story of the time spent in environmental review. For EAW specifically, we're looking at the time that the RGU deemed an EAW complete to the time that they made an EIS need decision. And similar for an AUAR and EIS, it's the time from when it was deemed complete to the adequacy decision of that EIS or the EIS is kind of all over the place. There's one significant one in there that I worked on that took a long time to finish. Looks pretty scary over there in 2020, but EAW is really not showing any change at all. Part of that is just an error in the data that we collect is really just reflecting what the rule prescribes you have to do an EAW in, so there's just not much fluctuation in that data. AUARs may be slightly trending up in certain years. Typically, I think you would just see them higher when we see more large AUARs completed, which we did this year in 2024. 7 of the 9 AUARs that were completed were actually large AUARs. And a large AUAR just has additional scoping process steps that just likely add to the time compared to a regular AUAR. Next slide, please. So I did want to add a little slide and information about some of the new things that we're working on in data, specifically the survey that staff launched in September of 2024. Now, in the report itself, there just wasn't enough data to include, since given that we didn't start till September and there was just not enough EAWs to really get a lot of input yet. But the survey itself is really meant to inform about interactions between project proposers and RGUs before an EAW is published. So we're learning more about the actual prep of an EAW. In addition to the interactions, we're asking questions about the time that takes, as well as trying to gain some information for the engagement efforts that may be taking place before publication. So the survey itself is pretty simple, 15 questions, most of them are yes or no. Like I said, there's some pieces in there where we do ask for dates. We did have about 20-some% response rate, so it's pretty good, but there just hasn't been enough EAWs. So that 20-some% is still only about 5 projects have responded. So not great, but I did want to highlight some of the information that we think is going to be really informative. So from those 5 responses, I've got 3 on here. One was, I think, submitted with some errors, so I didn't include it. And the other was actually the project proposer and the RGU are the same, so it just provides information. But in the process of the survey, one project did identify that during the EAW prep process, there were more than 2, there's at least 2 or more incomplete submittals from the RGU to the project proposer. And so the time that it's spent from that first receipt of a draft EAW to the time that they published was obviously significantly longer than the chart next to it, where there were no incomplete submittals in that process time. So we have 382 days from drafts to publication in a project that had more than 2 incomplete submittals versus 50 days for 2 projects that did not have any incomplete submittals. So really informative, I think, and will help paint more of a picture of the actual full time that environmental review takes, given that I showed you the time earlier in that other slide, but that's really just kind of from completion to end. And this starts to add some more information about that prep time. And next slide, with that, I think I'll hand it to Sarah.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm going to go here to our petitions. The petition process is an important part of what the EQB provides for ways that the public can participate in environmental review process. So including commenting on the environmental impacts of projects during comment periods, members of the public can also petition for an EAW if the projects don't meet a mandatory category threshold. So a little petition refresher for you. Rule allows any person to request the preparation of an EAW on a project by filing a petition that contains the signatures and mailing addresses of at least 100 individuals who reside or own property in the state. So that's the bare minimum. And then the petition also must include these elements. There's a project description, the proposer of the project, a petitioner's representative, and then a description of the potential environmental effects that could result from the project. And then lastly, the petitioner does have to have material evidence that indicates that because of the nature or location of the proposed project that there might be potential for significant environmental effects. Next slide. So we received 15 complete petitions in 2024 in the following categories. We had 3 in the residential development, 2 in residential development in shoreland outside of the 7-county metro. There were 2 for resorts, campgrounds, and RV parks and shorelands, and 2 for events facilities. And the next slide. Additionally, there were 1 each in each of the following categories. We had a fuel conversion and animal feedlots both in 1, 1 for non-metallic mineral mining, 1 for industrial, commercial, and institutional facilities, an air pollution 1, and animal feedlots. Next slide. Ultimately, 2 out of the 15 petitions resulted in an order for an EAW. So that's the end goal when you file a petition, is that an EAW is ordered. The fuel conversion and feedlot project had an order, and so did a separate feedlot project. It's interesting to note, if you're doing the math in your head, that each petition has an individual story, and an order for an EAW doesn't always result in an EAW actually being completed. So sometimes projects are abandoned for one reason or the other, or substantially changed and become a new project. So that happens too. Next slide. So this slide is going to look at the previous 10 years of petition data. The blue bar there represents the number of complete petitions that we received. The 10-year average is 11.7 petitions per year, which puts this year's 15 is a little higher than average over the time, but it is really steady with the last couple of years, right around 14, 15 petitions coming in. The green portion of the bar represents the number of incomplete petitions we received this year. We did have 11 overall, which is significantly higher than our 10-year average of 4.5 per year. Remembering back to the previous slide, petitions can be deemed incomplete for missing any one of those 5 required elements that we saw on that earlier slide. And many of the petitions we received were missing more than one element. 6 of them didn't have all of the signatures. 8 of them lacked any material evidence. 1 lacked a petitioner's representative. Anecdotally, for most of these petitioners, this process was entirely new. So in the end, all 11 incomplete petitions were eventually deemed complete, but it took some work with our technical assistance staff. We do hope to address some common areas of confusion in our guidance update in 2025. Lastly, the blue line looks at the 2 out of the 15 petitions that did result in an order for an EAW. That was 13% overall. This portion is down from recent years and down from the 10-year average of 23%. It's tough for us to have data about why that decision lies entirely with the RGUs. And as a reminder, an RGU will base their decision on whether the evidence presented or otherwise known to them demonstrates that the project may have the potential for significant environmental effects. Not shown on our graph, but also important, are 4 out of the 15 petitions, or 27% of them, are still on hold. So that just means that the project didn't have a government approval that was required at this time, or they may have withdrawn project permits. The petition itself will remain valid. So for 1 year after that time, if there are permits that are required, they will need to consider that petition. Next slide. So when we move on to the Technical Assistance Library, EQB engaged intern Elizabeth Butts-Syhan through the Increasing Diversity in Environmental Careers, the IDEC program, to create a data taxonomy and an index for technical assistance call logs. So Elizabeth analyzed all our call logs, and she assigned topics, subtopics, mandatory categories, and RGU information. By applying a taxonomy to all of these, it allows us as staff to understand the general nature of our calls, and it helps identify trends and gaps in understanding. That's both for the environmental review practitioners that are calling us, and then the calls coming from the members of the public. Staff added a new category called EQB responses to our call log this year and started using the taxonomy in September. So what we're doing is creating a library of technical assistance information that enables us to be really consistent over time, and it also helps when onboarding new staff. This slide and the next will provide a snapshot of the new taxonomy that is applied to the calls that we received starting in September. So this current slide depicts 6 main topic areas. We've got the petition process, we have off-topic calls, environmental review, which is by far our most frequently asked topic, some questions about the role of the EQB, thresholds, and AUARs. Next slide. Then this slide looks at the most frequently asked topic, the ER process, and it further breaks it down into subtopics, including like science, technology or analysis, project changes, process itself. Sometimes folks are asking for help with mandatory category interpretation. We get a lot of inquiries about materials, forms, and monitor submittals, etc. The 2 subtopics, including process and forms or monitor submittals, are our most frequently asked types of questions. And the questions oftentimes boil down to, like, how does the rule apply in this unique situation? And what do I do next? And sometimes I need this to get in the monitor and I missed the deadline, please help, and that kind of thing. The new index allows us to search by fields and filter for specifics. It sheds light on the needs of different practitioners, and then will help us to hone our future guidance documents. Next slide. So staff wanted to understand if RGUs were using our new EAW form that was adopted back in December of 2022. Sometimes it can be hard to know if it's being adopted and understood until you really look into it. So our new form, for the 2022 form, includes a question on considerations for climate adaptation and resilience. That's question number 7. And a question on greenhouse gas emissions or the carbon footprint. That's question number 18 of proposed projects. So staff conducted a review of 90 EAWs that came in 2023 and 2024. And 85 out of 90, or 94% of the EAWs submitted did use that updated form. And 98% of those that used the updated form did complete questions 7 and 18. So overall, we can say that the users have broadly adopted the new form. We also did an analysis of the source citations in the documents, and it shows that folks are using the resources that are provided in the EQB guidance. And then practitioners are also sourcing their own info independently as well. Next slide. So overall, some of their significant data takeaways from 2024 include a little lower EAW count, a high percentage of incomplete petition submittals, and then a low percentage of petitions that are ordered to EAWs. And we did get some process insights directly from those practitioners as well. The ER process is proving to be successful for them in identifying usable information. And we do have a higher than anticipated number of RGUs that are holding public meetings for EAWs, even though they aren't required by rule. So that was positive. And that concludes our 2024 performance report. The next slide does have contact information for both Jesse and I.
Thank you both, Jesse and Sarah, for that information. And do ERIS members have any questions or thoughts for Jesse or Sarah? Go ahead, Commissioner Kessler.
Well,
Wanna go-
Member Bauer-Kemper
we'll go-
hasn't said anything yet.
Sure, we'll go to Board Member Bauer-Kemper, then Commissioner Kessler.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Jesse and Sarah, for gathering all this data, sharing with us today, presenting this in the packet. I'm grateful for this as an ongoing process, which is gonna, I think, yield a lot more insight as further time and time goes by and data comes in. I have 2 questions today, probably for Jesse, both of which grow out of the discussion of usable information and also the little bit of data regarding the recent EIS numbers that are shown in that. It's on packet page 11. I forget which slide. And it seems consistent with the longer term trend that's on packet page 12. So the first question is, I'm wondering, am I understanding correctly? If we look at this long term, I'm curious about the percentage of EAWs that determine that an EIS is needed, which seems to be 0. But I'm wondering if that's indeed the case or what that looks like.
Chair, Member Bauer-Kempner, we didn't include much of that information yet about how many EAWs do order an EIS. We do know that it's relatively low. It is not 0, but it is relatively low. It's something that we intend to include as we go forward. It's on kind of some of my data to-do list is to go back a little bit and track some of those EAWs that have ordered EISs. I can think 2 off the top of my head, I think happened in 2024, maybe only 1. But for the most part, yeah, you're right. They are low. It's not 0%, but it is quite low. But yes, that is good information that we do intend to include as we move forward. At this time, we just don't have enough of the past years to really compare. So we do intend to do that. It's on my to-do list for sure.
Okay, great. That sounds good. I'll look forward to seeing how that comes together. That's good. So my follow-up question moves, stays there sort of in that realm of the EIS numbers, but connects it with the usable information. So I particularly value that the EIS process deliberately presents project mitigation methods and project alternatives. both of which I think are pretty important to any project going under environmental review. And today's data really usefully showed us that the EAW process appears to be enabling the overwhelming majority of RGUs to identify mitigation measures, which I tend to associate with EIS, right? It's an explicit, outcome of EIS, the mitigation, as well as the alternatives. But unlike mitigation, the EAW doesn't substantially engage with project alternatives, or at least the data didn't inquire into that. And so with the relative rarity of the EIS process, I'm wondering about that side of things, right? We learned a fair amount about mitigation, but I'm wondering about project alternatives. Is it possible to gather data about project alternatives? Is that even a discussion that happens in relation to EAWs? And I guess I'm just wondering about your thoughts in general. What could we do better to support RGUs in identifying project alternatives? I'll put it that way. Thanks.
Sure, Member Bauer-Kempner, that's a great idea, sure. Something that I have had a lot of interest in doing is really understanding what sort of information are EAWs and EAW process providing to RGUs. Now, obviously, an alternatives analysis is not required in an EAW. Now, some of the information I think we could begin to collect. Now, could we do it well? I'm not quite sure yet what that looks like. Is through the EAW process, has your project evolved or changed from the data that you've learned? And that kind of falls into the realm of alternatives, I think, as your project grows in the EAW process, you've maybe pivoted certain ways and gained information that made you think otherwise that you should develop your project. Certainly not quite to the realm of an EIS alternatives analysis, but does provide really good information about what the EAW is doing. The reality of us implementing that is a little difficult. We could certainly start to comb through EAWs and look at what projects have learned and things, but that's very time consuming, obviously, and a little bit leading to your own conclusions that might provide incorrect information. So probably surveys for now is something that we did when we launched the survey in September. Some of those questions were there. It was just probably we're not quite ready to implement that yet to understand fully what the EAW process is doing. We had some feedback that maybe the questions just needed some more vetting and things of that nature before we can implement. But certainly something that we're thinking about in gaining more information about the EAW process. Hopefully I answered your question. I kind of went roundabout there. But.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jesse. My question didn't deserve any more clarity than you've given it for sure. So I appreciate that. I just want to call attention, I suppose, to the rarity of the EIS, the two-pronged purpose of the EIS and mitigation alternatives, and how one of those prongs is addressed pretty substantially here and the other one isn't, and I understand why that's the case. And so I want it to be something that we continue to look at big picture as we think about performance. So thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bauer-Kemper and Commissioner Kessler.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Jesse and Sarah for pulling this together. As someone who frequently gets questions about why it takes so long and what each step of the process entails, I think this data is invaluable for all of us. It's encouraging to see that people are using the new forms. Lots of people put a ton of work into that and the climate calculator, so that's great. I think just that alone is nice to be able to validate all of the effort that has gone into that. And then the other thing that I think is very interesting, and I think we should continue to think about how to suss out, is the interaction that happens prior to a EAW being complete. And I know you said that's the survey or the EAW application being complete. It's a survey that went out and we have a limited number of responses. I'm intrigued by the statistic that says if you had to submit multiple iterations of the application, it takes more than 3 times the amount of days that if you only had to submit one. I don't know if there's anything in those survey results, and maybe it's just such a limited data set, that indicates that there were iterative back and forth with the RGU staff prior to submittals, because I can tell you that where we have really complex projects that are being proposed, there's a tremendous amount of conversation that is happening even before applications get submitted. And hopefully that results in a package that is complete and both administratively and technically so that it can be processed through the avenue that makes the most sense. So I guess the question is, do we have any understanding if there was more conversation in those instances where people said either it wasn't complete or it was complete, and how many days it took for the EAW?
Chair and Commissioner Kessler, sure. The survey itself doesn't go really in depth into why there were incomplete submittals. It just assumes there was something wrong and the RGU needed it to come back. There are questions in the survey that ask, did the project proposer have discussions with the RGU prior to submitting to see if that, would point to, more incomplete or more no incomplete type of submittals. And then additionally, there's some things in there that ask, were there unforeseen circumstances that happened that added to that nature? So there are some questions that sort of get to that, but not fully. We just didn't find an easy way to get a simple answer in the survey to be like, well, why was it? It was just, we had to kind of assume that the RGU identified an issue. And
Jesse, can I think to help answer the question, if I recall, the question is sort of, when did you first know you had to do an EAW? And so trying to get that, even if there wasn't an application, if it was sort of like, we all had discussion, we're trying to get that date. And as Jesse said, it's balancing having something easy enough that people would fill it out and having useful information was a challenge. But that's right. We didn't say like, when did someone submit something? We sort of said, when did you know?
There's a couple of questions. Yeah, there was one that just says, did the RGU inform the project proposer about the need for any EAWs? I think that's a really important piece to learn. Did you just get an EAW without having conversations? Now I just lost my train of thought. I had one other one that I wanted to talk about. Don't have 3 kids because your brain goes quiet. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but there are things in there that is trying to point the picture of how much interactions did you really have before getting it? Did that really add to the time that we really deemed?
Go ahead, Karen, Jesse, and Director Nuschler. I so appreciate the balance of like, please fill out our survey, but it's real easy and won't take that much time, as opposed to, we'd really like information and the nitty-gritty details so we can measure whether or not we need to make improvements or changes in this area. And just, as we continue to ask people, it'll be interesting to see if there is any way to measure the time and value that RGU staff are taking before applications are submitted or determined to be complete or incomplete. So appreciate that concerted effort.
And I will say, kind of our thought was that if we had it out and we did like September, October to November or December, like a little bit of a test run, just like, will people answer it? Is it useful? Kind of hoping we could do that so that it was really solid on January 1, 2025, and hopefully we'll have good data for. I'm really excited about it too.
Any other questions? Yes, from ERIS members or from board members. I have a question, Jesse. So, and of course, I tend to look at all this data with the lens of transportation projects. We're talking about EAWs with transportation. Many of our transportation projects that get to the level where an EAW would be needed, we want to keep eligible for federal funding. So we'll do an environmental assessment and have the worksheet be a part of the process in the document. You mentioned the RGU holding public hearings. So is that, let's take a step back. I think about, say, MnDOT, for instance, being a project proposer. we will do public engagement, then have official public hearing. So when you talk about the RGUs holding the public hearing, is that oftentimes in addition to the project proposer holding a public hearing, or is that just one or the other, generally speaking, or any thoughts on that?
Sure, Chair. So the data that we collect would strictly fall within basically the comment period of the EAW. They're holding an additional public meeting during that comment period. So that's the only data that we're able to collect.
Okay.
We don't have any, say, open house things about a project that would be building information prior to them starting the EAW. We are asking in the survey if there are early engagement efforts happening during that prep process. Don't have enough data yet for that, but, and again, it wouldn't go into the level of they're holding a meeting. It's more so, did you share information with outside agencies? And did that information that you received provide information that was usable?
Let's ask one more time. Any other questions from ERIS members or board members? Not seeing any. Well, again, Jesse, Sarah, thank you so much for compiling this information, presenting it, and all that you're doing on the process for environmental review and tracking the data and doing that with us. So appreciate the performance report. And then that brings us to, why don't we go ahead and have a 5-minute break.
Want to come back at 2:15?
Let's do that. That's easier. Let's come back at 2:15, everybody. Thank you. well, welcome back from break, everyone. So we will continue on with the agenda, and the next item on the agenda, we have Steph Abo, our greenhouse gas data analyst with EQB, who will present the greenhouse gas emission calculator update. Steph, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm here today to give you an update on all of the great work that we've been doing over the past 6 months since I last talked to ERIS. A lot of work has gone on, and we actually have a draft calculator to show today. I'm going to start, though, by giving us a little bit of background so that we are all correctly remembering the work that has been done as of last summer and where we're going and who the members of the team are. I will also be looking at, the scope and methodology that we have decided on for this calculator. And then I will get into the calculator demo. Importantly, we'll follow up with the input process. We are now firmly in that input window for this draft calculator and very excited about hearing what everyone has to say. And then I will talk about our next steps as we finish up this project and leave plenty of time for discussion. So as Sarah and Jesse just talked about, we are motivated in this calculator by the addition of questions 7 and 18. Question 7 is that climate adaptation and resiliency question that asks project proposers to imagine the future of climate in Minnesota relative to their project. Question 18 is asking for a quantitative greenhouse gas emissions as well as quantitative greenhouse gas mitigation measures that a project could undertake. Since these were introduced in December 2022, people have found it to be a really, technical request that requires a lot of knowledge and background research to get the correct equations and emissions factors and assumptions into these calculations. And as you would expect, we get answers that are well-intentioned, but can be missing key emissions factors and sources. And so this calculator does make this process more efficient, effective, and consistent. The team that's been working on this, it's really 4 groups. Us at the Environmental Quality Board and staff have been contracted with ICF to create this calculator. We are going to be approving deliverables in June, and I have been leading the calculator's user group, which is comprised of a lot of experts in environmental review. ICF is our contractor. They're responsible for creating the calculator and all of the final documentation and reports that come along with that. They also lead the technical advisory team. And the technical advisory team are our experts more in the data and existing greenhouse gas calculation space. So not necessarily a familiarity with environmental review there, but they know a lot about calculating greenhouse gas emission numbers. And so we've relied on them heavily to advise us on our general approach to the calculator, as well as, help identify data and existing models that we can utilize, and help us form those assumptions when that data is not there for us. Perhaps in the way that we would like for our calculation, we can make some assumptions to fill those gaps. And the technical advisory team has been our lead in doing that. The calculator user group, as I said, it was experts more so in the environmental review space. It was made up of people who have previously filled out an EAW form, be it local government or consultants, or even members of our team here. I cannot remember the name. The tech. I don't know. Don't have 2 kids either. Your brain just goes. The tech members here for the EQB. And these two groups have really been instrumental in leading the direction that this calculator has taken. And for those that are on the call right now, I just want to thank them for being so instrumental in this process and helping us out as we travel through this great calculator adventure. As we reach the end of the project, there are 4 deliverables that we're looking at approving over the next few months. And first and foremost is the calculator itself. It is an Excel spreadsheet tool. And the majority of it is calculation, but it does provide a basic user guide within the calculator itself.
Your sound, your sound cut out, Steph, right after you said it's an Excel spreadsheet tool.
All right, I will go back then.
Cut out.
Okay, are I good now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's an Excel spreadsheet tool. The majority of it is calculation, of course, but there is a basic user guide at the beginning of the tool to help users navigate the calculator. There's also a report that will be coming out that really gives a comprehensive overview of every decision that has been made in the process of developing this calculator, those scoping and methodology research efforts that I talked about that we undertook last summer. There will also be a more comprehensive user manual that has a lot of detailed information about calculator use, and that will show the background and instruction for using all of the calculations and tables that I will show in my demo. And then finally, we have added a training component to the contract. So ICF will be creating and providing 4 training opportunities. These will be virtual trainings. This was just added to the contract, so we haven't really nailed down what these trainings will consist of yet, but they will be open to the public. So if you're interested in being part of these trainings, look for an announcement about this, or you can contact me. My email will be at the end of this presentation. So our project timeline, we are 1 year into the project and quickly reaching its conclusion. We kicked off the project last March and dove right into that data and model review. And then the technical advisory team, when they started their work in May, helped us a ton with that over the summer. And through that work, we were able to finalize our scoping and methodology in September and turn our focus to the calculator construction itself. Our first version of the calculator came out in December 2024, and that was when our user group was formed and got a first look at what we were calling the calculator at that time, but it really was just a skin with no functionality on it. But even at that point, they were providing great feedback on the flow of the calculator, the look, the ease of use. And so over the course of the last few months, we have had a few more versions come out with increasing functionality in the user group, and tech advisory team have both gotten to look at those and offer feedback throughout the winter, which has led us to March 2025, where we are now, and we have a fully functional draft calculator. All emission sources and mandatory categories that we are covering are included in this calculator. You can start with any of the projects in these mandatory categories and do a little dummy calculation if you so choose. And through that calculation, get a greenhouse gas emission and fill out an EAW. In May, the calculator will be finalized. So between March and May, we will have an input period. And once that calculator is finalized, we'll start work on the report and user manual that are other deliverables that will come at the end of this contract. May and June is when we plan to roll out that training and plan to roll out the calculator, or start planning our rollout of the calculator. And that rollout is planned for July 1st, when we will officially release it to the public for use. And the calculator report and user manual will be put onto the EQB website, and it will be live for anyone filling out an EAW if they so choose to use for those climate questions. Okay, so now we've gone through a lot of the logistics review, and I just want to touch on the methodology and scoping that we really worked hard on last summer to remind us of what this calculator is. So when talking about the methodology, we're thinking about how do we construct this in the most complete way to get good estimates of greenhouse gas emissions for these projects. And we chose to do that through a life cycle assessment approach. This includes direct and indirect emissions, both upstream and downstream, and all phases of the project. And again, when we were going through the creation of the calculator and the work to construct it this winter, we really held those three words, effective, efficient, and consistent, in our minds, because those are really, the overarching goals of this project. We want it to be a simpler alternative for project proposers, LGUs, RGUs to come to and fill out for their EAW questions. And then for the scope, we needed to narrow down what we would include in this first iteration of the project through June 2025. So our current project will provide quantitative emissions for greenhouse gas, CO2 equivalent emissions. The question 18 does ask for quantitative mitigation strategies. The calculator will only be providing qualitative mitigation strategies at this time. But and I'll show you in the demo, it's a good jumping off point for users to, identify a few mitigation strategies and then begin their research from there for their own calculations. We also are able to provide qualitative adaptation strategies. This was not originally in the scope that we talked about last September, but through some work with ICF, we found a great way to be able to answer some of these questions. And so that has been added to the scope since I last talked to you. And we also decided not to include the decommissioning phase. So we have construction, operation, but not decommissioning at this time. We felt like the resources were better spent on really nailing down the construction and operation, which are more impactful in the greenhouse gas calculation, and more is known about them from a user perspective. So future work, we do plan to include more emission sources, including these decommissioning sources that we aren't including in this iteration. And we do want to expand those mitigation calculations into the quantitative space so that we can help users there all the way through that mitigation portion of their EAW. All right, so now we've talked about the logistical background, we've talked about our scoping background, and we can finally start talking about the calculator. I just want to remind you that the calculator itself is fairly simple. There's user inputs, which is known information about a project that a user is expected to bring to the calculator. But the calculator has a lot of built-in database assumptions, a lot of defaults that are available to users if they do not have information to override those defaults. And all of this is fed into equations that convert these inputs into emissions. And then we get quantitative emissions, qualitative mitigation, and qualitative adaptation out in our results. As I quickly mentioned, some default assumptions can be overridden by the user. So if the user comes in and they have more specific information about their project, they can override defaults. And some of these default assumptions also have variations, which I'll show in my demo. But we wanted this calculator to be very flexible. We are trying to cover a broad space in covering all mandatory categories and all these emission sources. And so to do that, we had to incorporate a lot of flexibility into the calculator. And I think that we've been pretty successful at doing that. So I'm about to get in the demo, I promise, but I want to make sure we have some grounding takeaways before we get in there so that we know sort of what I'm hoping for you to get out of my demo. And number one is how to navigate the calculator. What is there and how do I get to it? It's important to know, what information is in the introduction and user guide tabs and what information isn't there, what might be in the user manual that's coming out separate from the calculator. The Inputs and defaults are the major portion of the calculator that the user will be interacting with. So it's important to understand how those work. And then using the results tab to interpret greenhouse gas emissions impact is also an important part to understand. And then finally, I want to give an overview of the mitigation and adaptation tabs so that you have a familiarity with those and how users can take that data and answer those portions of the climate questions in the EAW. So right off the bat, I'm just going to show you a quick screenshot before we get in the calculator about how we are going to navigate through it. There are 5 groups of tabs here. The first is informational, so that's where you'll find the introduction and user guide. Then there are 3 tabs for input, 3 tabs for results, 2 for improvement options, those are the mitigation and adaptation tabs, and then 2 tabs that are shown here for background. There are actually a few more I'll show you in the demo, but these are simply for a user to go to if they're more interested in the background of the calculations, what constants we're feeding into the calculations within the input tabs to the output tabs. So you can track the entire beginning to end calculation with the information in these background tabs. And with that, we have finally made it to demo time, which is very exciting. Okay, so this is our calculator here. I'm going to start on the introduction tab and work left to right. This introduction tab basically outlines the purpose of the calculator and then gives a little 1-sentence summary of what the scope is for each of these emission sources. We have included all of these emission sources in the calculator, everything in teal here. Most importantly, though, I think is the introduction's limitations here. There were some emission sources that we had to exclude, and those are listed here. We also had to do a few things with the emission factors that we wanted to call out in our limitations here with regards to the global warming potential values. We also, for highway projects and feedlots, do want to acknowledge the existence of other calculators. For highway projects, we do not support those in this calculator. We will direct people to use the min.mice calculator, which is the equivalent of this tool for highway projects. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel when such a great tool already existed. So we do include some road calculations if that is part of another mandatory category, but for highway projects, this is not the calculator to use. We will direct to mice. And then for feedlot projects, MPCA does have a feedlot model that we are aligning with in this calculator, and we did want to mention. So if the user does want to use a calculator, there are options here to either use our calculator or MPCA's model. And so we wanted to call that out and let the user know that they had options. And down here are just some disclaimers about ICF and using the tool and what is implied and not. And then we have the user guide, which you got a quick look at in my screenshot from the slide before. But basically, there are 6 steps to this process, and we'll go through each and every one of them. There have been some issues if you do end up going to our Engagement HQ site, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, and downloading this calculator to explore yourself. There have been some issues with the macro settings, and here is just the instructions for dealing with those errors that you might run into. And then there's a legend that tells you about all of the different color tabs and cells that you see. Most importantly for a user are all of the yellow cells. Those are the only ones that you can input data into and edit. Every other cell color and every other tab that is not yellow, you cannot edit at all or enter data into. They are purely informational. And so the other interesting color here is green, and that's where you'll get all of your results. So let's dive into the first yellow tab here, which is step 1, project background. And this is a pretty simple tab where you put in the basic information about your project. I have pre-filled in all of these input spaces here for a generic warehouse project. So here is a cell, for instance, where you can just write in whatever your project name is. But here, this is a drop down where you can select what your mandatory category is. I've selected a storage facility. I've put it in my home county of Olmsted, and then just filled out the rest of this information. In a lot of these input tables, you will see these very helpful buttons next to it where as the table is blank, you can look at the defaults. And if the defaults are what you would like to use, you can hit apply defaults and it will autofill all of those cells for you. But you can also fill in your own values if a user comes to the calculator and they have more detailed information about all of this, they are welcome to put in their own numbers here. The other interesting one here is this electricity provider. You can choose grid average, or there are different emission factors for all of these four electricity providers. I'm going to leave it at grid average because Olmsted is not provided for by any of those. And then another interesting table here is which emission sources are applicable based on your mandatory category. So here is what the calculator thinks you should put information in for based on your mandatory category. And so you can either apply defaults or you can go in and individually change these if you would like. These will change based on what mandatory category you select in the dropdown up at the top. So for instance, I was to select animal feedlot, this one here, enteric fermentation and manure management would change to yes. So that's kind of fun to play around with, but we'll leave it on storage for now. And that is the extent of the project background tab. Most of your inputs happen here in the user inputs tab. There are 6 emission sources to input information for construction and 12 over here for operation. The calculator by default does hide sources that aren't applicable to your project, and I'll show you that as we scroll a little bit further down. A lot of these tables, it's about 50-50 ones that have defaults and ones that don't, but there are here options for selecting your sourcing for instance, material inputs for construction. So you can do domestic, imported, or unknown. I've chosen domestic for all of our warehouse building materials. But for instance, here's a table, and this one is sort of interesting. If you don't put anything in here, it does give you a warning that your values are not summing to 100, which is very useful as a user coming into this. I think, these checks will help the integrity of the data and calculations as they go through this. So wherever the values are supposed to sum to something, there are these checks to prevent the user from doing something they don't want to do. I will just apply defaults here, and I've done the same as I scroll down here. For operational phase, a few of these tables do black out cells that you wouldn't need to fill out. So because I only put in square footage for an industrial building, we only have to fill out the industrial energy intensity, and I just applied the defaults. But I did zero out kerosene and fuel oil just to show you that you can, in fact, override these defaults. And then here are some tables that are grayed out because we do not need to put any information into them for our mandatory category. And you just go down this tab here and fill out all the information. It's roughly 10 to 15 tables for a storage facility. As I said, about 50% of them have defaults available if you would, as a user, would choose to use those instead of your other information. These buttons here do take you down to whichever one you click on. So here, if I click on land use change, it takes me down to the land use change for construction. And that is really the extent of the information you have to input to get a calculation out for greenhouse gas emissions. There is this other input tab here called Notes. And for users, I would highly suggest they put their notes in this table about where their information is coming from. If you get all the way through this and the calculations just aren't making sense, you can go back and justify your own inputs into the calculator through these notes. And as you come to the calculator and leave it and come back, we have this here so that that information tracking can be easy for the user and for others who view their calculator if they're sending it to other people as well. So now we get to move on to the results tabs. I'm going to take a quick water break. Sorry. Been dealing with a small cold, so I knew that was going to happen. Okay, so our results tabs here, and I will show real quick, in each tab there's an arrow here where you can go to the next tab if you do not want to click on the tabs at the bottom. For construction, you can see those 6 emission sources listed here. And for each one, it shows what you input, what calculation needs to happen to change it into a CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emission. And then your total number will be in this dark cell. And so you can see there are tables and calculations for each and every one of these emission sources all the way down. And the same for operation. All 12 that we were required to put information in for will have a calculation that then totals up the CO2 equivalent for your information that you put in for your project. And then the results tab consolidates the information in those 2 tabs into a cumulative and annualized emission. So you can see what your cumulative CO2 equivalent emissions will be and your annualized. And then very helpfully, there are some charts down here that show that in a more visual form. And I find that these are really useful for moving on to that mitigation portion. You can look at these charts and see, what is my biggest contributor to my greenhouse gas emissions, and maybe where can I make the biggest impact in mitigation. And so for our warehouse, that is building energy consumption. And I will move on to the mitigation tab with that in mind. The mitigation tab here lists dozens of mitigation efforts, and they're all categorized by the emission source and what project phase you are in with that emission source. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to filter these so that only building energy consumption is selected. And because I selected building energy consumption, only operation is selected here because we do not have any construction building energy consumption emissions. And so you can see here, what's left is a couple dozen mitigation strategies that a project proposer can implement. And again, these are qualitative. The question asks for quantitative, but these are a good jumping off point where they can select a few of these and do a little more research and complete the calculations for these individually, if that is the mitigation effort they would choose to put in their project. And then the very last calculation tab is our adaptation strategies. This is question 7 in the EAW. We have identified 6 climate trends that are appropriate for the state of Minnesota. And so we can select any number of those climate trends and then move over here and select a project characteristic for us. By building a warehouse, I didn't show it to you, but in the data, I put it in a forest and cut down some forest to do it. We have increased impervious surface. And so I'm going to select just heavier, more damaging rain to narrow down this option. So with these 2 selected, I'm given 5 adaptation strategies, and the user can take these. They can do a little bit more research on them if they so choose, but these answers here can be used to answer the EAW question 7 climate resiliency questions. And that is the extent of the interactive portion of the calculator. We do have these tabs here, which have all of the assumptions that have gone into the calculator and the constants that we've used here. As I said, there are additional tabs, and I'll scroll all the way over where you get really specific information on what numbers are being used for each of these subtopics here. So for electricity, this is what this tab looks like. You can really drill down to the very, very basic numbers that we are putting into these calculations. We wanted everything to be really, really transparent. So a user, knows what they're getting out, and if there's any question, they can go back and trace their calculation. We certainly didn't want it to be black box for anyone. And that is the end of the calculator demo. I can certainly pop this up when we get to discussion again if there are more questions or you want me to click on anything. But for now, I will transition back to the PowerPoint and finish up by talking about our input period. Hopefully now that you've taken a look at the calculator, you maybe want to get your hands on it and start digging around and poking around for projects that you are perhaps interested in. We have the ability to do that. And now through April 18th, we are having an input period. We want you to go get that calculator. We want you to poke around. Any input received before that April 18th deadline will be considered for inclusion in this calculator. We cannot guarantee that it will be an improvement in the calculator, but we will at least review it, and we hope to have a comment board and tracker where we respond to comments, even if they do not result in any change to the calculator. And the type of input we want is very broad. We want everything from technical input to general approach. So you can give us input that, this bubble isn't aligned with the one above it, or, I found a bug in the calculation, to, I'm not sure why you're using this model's values versus another model's values, and everything in between. If you have a thought about the calculator, put it in the input and we will gladly address it. We do need feedback, obviously from ERIS and the EQB, but also from the public and any other interested parties. We want as many eyes on this calculator as possible. In the 2 weeks that we've had it, we've already found a handful of bugs, and we're slowly working through. This process is really fluid. If you go to the Engagement HQ site, which is linked there, and will be in the recording of this meeting, you can leave feedback there and also download the calculator and any of the scoping and methodology documentation that we've worked on so far. But I will say, as we are identifying bugs, we are putting new versions of the calculator out, and I will update as soon as something is fixed. I will update the link there for the calculator so that you have the most up-to-date and fewest bugs possible. But it is very much a draft, so we expected a lot of hiccups here and there, and so it's all part of the process. And so the next steps, we are quickly wrapping up this project. We have about 3 months left on it. As I said, the calculator is going to be finalized in early May, and we're going to move on to that draft report and user manual. I plan to come back to the full board on May 21st and talk about that report and user manual, as well as a more detailed planning for our training that ICF is going to put out. And I should mention, ICF is doing 4 trainings in May and June before their contract ends. But I then plan to take those training materials and provide trainings on behalf of the EQB. So those will continue throughout the next year as needed. So if you're not able to get into these trainings, the May and June ones, there will be many opportunities to learn about the calculator over the coming year. And then July 1st, we are going to be putting it up on the website and making it officially released. And we are all excited for that date. And I think, we haven't had any delays or anything. I think that's a very achievable goal. And we are on track to complete all of this wonderful work by then. So with that, I'll end it. And there's just a couple discussion questions here. I would love to hear your thoughts on the draft, and if there are any major concerns about the project timeline, anything you think we missed and need to address before the middle to end of June when this contract is up.
Thank you, Steph. And well, tremendous amount of work that's gotten us to this point. I'm really excited that we have a draft now to start looking at. So thank you for your leadership in that step, and then also to the tech reps and the experts that have all contributed to this effort so far. So ERIS members, what are your thoughts on the calculator draft, and any questions or concerns on the project timeline? Open it to anyone who wants to jump in. Go ahead, Todd Holman.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Wonderful presentation, amazing progress, and what a great tool. I'm always kind of a wonk for these kinds of things. One of the questions, though, is that at the end of the day, average humans have to make decisions on environmental mitigations and what to do. Planning commissions, local units of government that are doing this. So one of the things, if it isn't already developed, and I'm assuming you probably already have, is what does the number mean, at the end of the calculator? It's a number, right? It's a quantitative value, but how does that compare to airport noise if I want to do this, or this kind of emission if I'm doing a different kind of industry? So it seems to me like there'd be kind of a helpful guide that compares different types of emission uses run through this model. So it isn't comparing like an industry standard to this or MPCA's model to this or something else. That would have to be run through this so that we can kind of compare apples to apples, and that we can understand, is this a high number or is it an average number? Is it a low number? Do I really need to think about this harder? Those types of questions. And so I don't need an answer. It's just more of a thought for the end user. Who are the humans that are going to be able to interpret this and use this data?
Thank you, Chair Holman. Yeah, and if Steph or anyone has thoughts on that, they could go ahead and jump in too.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Member Holman. Yeah, it's, a calculator to some extent is only as good as its user. And so, I would love it if people would go in and do these comparative analyses. I'm not sure that we have plans to do that ourselves. It can certainly be an input that we take to ICF and see what their capacity to do something, putting those numbers in perspective on that results tab, if they have the capacity to do that, given our limited time left. It can certainly be something that we add to the next iteration of the project as a desired upgrade. But yeah, the calculator is going to require the user to have a little bit of knowledge about the things that they are inputting, and then hopefully a little bit of knowledge on the end about what their results coming out are. We are hoping that people don't just copy paste the results without thinking about them, and do a little, analysis in light of their own knowledge of the project. So yes, we could do a little bit more to help them there, but there's going to need to be some project knowledge, given the broad coverage of the tool in mandatory category space and emission space. We just can't be everything for everybody, unfortunately. But yeah, that's a good point that we could add a little bit of information there to kind of guide people toward a little research on their own. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit. I think Chair Holman, that when my understanding is that even back when we went to should we include greenhouse gas emissions in the EAW form, people ask kind of the same question. Well, then what do we do with it? How do we understand this number for one project in the context of that? And I think for us then in the context, one of the things we've heard, during the continuous improvement process as well, is how does that fit in the context of the decision criteria that the RGUs have to use to say, do I need to do an EIS? And so I think now that we have this tool that will help make things consistent, I'm interested in following up on what you say too, is are there a couple of places where we could say what's the orders of magnitude for a certain category, if you don't take any mitigation, and how low could you go if you get all of the mitigation? Something like, how do you tell, is this project, where does it sit at least within its own project category, is some of the things that have gone through my mind. So whether that's something we could put in, probably not something we'd put in the calculator, but I think definitely, as Steph said, something to think about as we're talking to people about how they might want to use it and how they might want to talk about it. So appreciate the thought on that.
You, Director Nussler. Other questions or thoughts from ERIS members? Or other board members? Yeah. Appreciate the progress on this. That's awesome. All right. Well, I don't see or hear anything from other ERIS members or board members. So at this point, we want to offer the opportunity for the public to make any comments on the climate calculator. And as a reminder, we will have a public comment period on other items outside of the calculator just a little later here in the agenda. But this first public comment period will be specifically for the climate calculator. So we will go to sign up sheets for anyone who's here in person who indicated they might want to comment. No in-person commenters on the climate calculator. So then we'll go ahead and go online. If you're online and you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand with the raise hand function. And Priscilla will call on you, and then you'll be able to come off of mute and speak online. So, and please be relatively brief with your comments, of course. Do we have any folks online who wanted to comment? See you later. Here, I don't see anyone, but maybe those. Yep, thank you. Okay, not seeing anyone at the moment, but we will just pause in case folks come up with questions or just need to find that raise hand function. Somebody has their hand up. Oh,
Here, if someone has raised their hand, Akila Sanders Reed. You should be able to go off mute and provide your comment.
Hi there. Thanks so much. Just a quick comment off the conversation immediately preceding this. I guess first off, thanks. This was an amazing presentation, and the spreadsheet magic that you all have accomplished is definitely blowing my mind. But thinking about giving folks the tools to analyze what those giant or tiny greenhouse gas emission numbers mean, I like the idea of a range of emissions for a particular project type, like what you could achieve with mitigation or without. And I also think it can be really helpful to have some sort of comparative unit of measurement, such as the greenhouse gas emissions of driving a mid-size gas-powered vehicle 100 miles or operating a coal plant for a year or things like that, that just give folks a sense of scale. So just one suggestion in helping decision makers, and I'm thinking more of decision makers than project proposers, but certainly both, like understand the numbers they're being given. Thanks.
To that comment. Right, any other commenters? Not seeing any. So why don't we go ahead and close the public comment period for the climate calculator. Again, thanks for the comment. Appreciate that. So then, ERIS members, any other further discussion or direction to the staff on this item? Yes, go ahead.
I'll just
Commissioner
say that I think we have heard for a number of years that this is what people are looking for as part of environmental review. So I think it's really encouraging and exciting to see it coming to fruition. So thanks and stay the course and looking forward to, I appreciate that people have an opportunity to try it out. There are many people at the MPCA who are interested in this. So hopefully they will all dig in as part of it, as will others who can give valuable input to improve it.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. And, again, just really excited. We're at this draft point and close to launching it, finalizing it and launching it. So I look forward to hearing what comments will come after we open up the draft. So, but thank you again, team, for all the efforts on that. Thank you, Steph, for the presentation on this today, too. So then let's move on and the next item on the agenda, and that is the public comment period for any other items. So again, make sure you have signed up on the in-person sheet if you are here in person, or raise your hand in Teams if you'd like to comment. And if you're in person, we'll call your name from the sign-up sheet and ask that you join us up here to speak. And if you're online, we'll notify you and you can unmute and speak. So please be patient because there might be a slight lag. And Priscilla will call on you if you're online, and then you'll be able to come, either come to the table if you're here in person, or come off mute if you're online and speak. So again, be relatively brief with your comments. And with that, Priscilla, please go ahead and call on first commenter.
Thank you, Chair. There is no one in person who's signed up to comment today, so I will open it up to the folks online and see if there's anyone there who would like to comment on you.
Please go ahead and find that raise hand function and raise your hand. Well, I am not seeing any hands raised or hearing about somebody wanting to comment online. So I think we can go ahead and close out that portion of the agenda today, the public comment period. All right, so then that brings us to closing and adjournment. So thank you, ERIS members and the board members who joined us here today for your participation and thoughtful discussion. Really appreciate that. We've come to the end of our agenda. So is there any further business? Not hearing anything for further business, and we don't need a motion to adjourn. So I will just go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. Thank you again, everybody.